We're going to talk about the wild west of real estate today. I'm really excited about this topic because I got a real life cowboy with me. And, you know, what I find all the time is that people get really have dreams of, waterfront sometimes, but a lot of people have dreams of land. They want a land to roam, to have four wheelers for their kids, or to ride a horse, or have chickens and fresh eggs. So that's a really common dream of having some land of which to just to go have a quiet place, get out of their IT world, their cubicle. So I've got the perfect guest today, and he really is a real life cowboy whose experience spans over 40 years. $1 billion career in real estate, crossing numerous states, three countries, and two continents. He's a rancher. He's a real estate and conservation expert. He's a radio host and an author of the acclaimed Threads West, an American Saga series. Welcome, Reid Lance Rosenthal. Welcome, Reid.
Well, great to be on with you, Patti. So they like chickens and eggs, but where's the beef?
Well, I think that's what you're going to tell us.
Exactly. Where's the beef?
That's what you're going to tell us today. Let me.
Where would you like to be? Where would you like to begin? Because you're trying to get your arms around a huge topic here.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking was, I'd really like to kind of pick your brain today and really maybe really shed some light for people on what are some things to think about if they're thinking, hey, I want to buy, 10, 20 acres. Is there a different thought process than 10,000 acres? And what does that look like? And kind of what have some of your experiences been?
Well, first of all, there are universal truths when it comes to buying real estate. And it doesn't matter whether it's a house on a quarter acre, fifth of an acre lot in town, or it's that 10, 20 acre little ranchette, we call it, or, little parcel, or a 10,000 acre spread. I mean, really, you're just adding zeros to it. But the steps that you go through, if you're going to be a savvy real estate buyer and investor, is the same for all real estate. And then there's some specialty things you need to be aware of when you're buying raw land, because there are some differences between buying your house on the lot in town and buying a piece of rural ground, which is out more or less in the middle of nowhere, or at least in a rural type setting. And so the first thing you have to do is, everybody gets enamored with the dirt, or they get enamored with the house, or they get enamored with the piece of real estate, whatever it is. It could be a commercial building. And they like the way it looks, and they like the way the door swings, and the way the light streams in the window, and all that nonsense. That's all important. But here's what's more important: where it's located. And I don't mean, gee, is it in a nice neighborhood? I mean, for your life, for your goals, for your investment, and for your enjoyment, if you happen to be mixing all those things in the recipe of purchasing a piece of real estate or land, what is the politics of the local community? What is the politics of the state? What is the fiscal strength of the state, or the lack of fiscal strength in the case of many states? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? What have taxes done? Are there taxes in the state? I mean, there's 4 or 5 states out there with no income tax. That's a 5 to 11% savings a year. I mean, that adds up over 20, 30 years. That's big money. And then you have the politics, okay? Are land use regulations in flux? Are they becoming more restrictive? Are you going to be precluded from doing something with your land or any other real estate that you wanted to do that was kind of part of your long-term plan for that investment or that purchase? And what, in terms of the community, what are the people like? I mean, if you're buying in a rural area, yes, you can be a hermit and you can be a recluse, and you could think that you're going to be Howard Hughes swatting flies for the last 2 years of his life alone in his mansion. But it's not going to happen that way. You're going to need neighbors. And you may only need them a few times a year, but when you need them, you really need them. And they have to be reliable, and they have to know what they're doing. And sometimes they're going to need you. Let's say there's a fire, a rural fire, which can spread out of control in a big wind, hot, dry summer weather. I mean, I'm sure some of the people listening to this are experiencing that as we speak, and I've experienced it. Let's say there is a drought and you have to cooperate on water. Let's say there is a huge blizzard and some people can't get out of their place. I mean, all of these kind of more esoteric thoughts are very concrete. I mean, they are part of the foundation of where and how you buy. If you buy 10 or 20 acres, I'll give you an example. Okay, I'm going to pick Illinois. It happens to be a blue state. It's been very poorly run. It has a $16 billion, that's billion with a B, current operating deficit. It is 16 billion underwater on its day-to-day expenses. I won't even get into the hundreds of billions on pensions and long-term liabilities. Its taxes have gone up. Its property taxes are among the highest in the country. Its income taxes are among the highest in the country. For whatever reason, Illinois doesn't seem to be changing which way it goes politically. I'm going to take Wyoming just because I'm sitting here right now in Wyoming. Okay, it has a $11 billion surplus. It has no income tax.
Wow.
And the property taxes, the headquarters ranch that I'm sitting in right now is 5,000 acres, all sorts of outbuildings, irrigated land, creek. It's beautiful. The total taxes on everything, all the building, all the equipment, all the land is $1,900 a year.
Wow.
Now I have a friend who has 5 acres about an hour outside of Chicago in a nice area. It's actually in Marengo, Illinois, if anybody's familiar with that. Her taxes are $11,000 for 5 acres in her house. So this is big stuff that people have to think about. And once again, I don't care whether it's a house in town, whether it's a piece of rural land, or it's a larger acreage farm, ranch, wherever you happen to be buying in the country. You really need to have a handle on the state, the county, the locality, and the community, because all of them will contribute to both your financial and your one of the books I've written is called Land for Love and Money, and it's also been a #1 bestseller. It's the first of 3 volumes, but the title says it all: land, and it's really about real estate of all types, for love and for money. Okay, it is about the balance of your heart and your wallet, your mind and your emotions when it comes to buying, owning, selling, whatever, a piece of real estate. And people have to blend that. Before I buy something, and I've bought a lot of stuff in my life, I've been involved in almost 10,000 transactions as a principal. And
Wow.
half of those buys, half of those sells. Okay. I have a 127-point checklist that I go through. It's about 82 points if it's a structure like a house or something like that. It's 127 if it's a piece of raw land. I mean, I'm checking out the water and the water rights, the well and the aquifer rights. I can tell you horror stories about people who have bought a beautiful piece of rural land and they figured, no problem, I'm going to drill a well. Well, guess what? There's aquifer right restrictions, and there's X amount of wells in the area, and they can't get a permit from the state. That's just one example of obviously a huge disappointment. And let's face it, if you buy a piece of land and there's no water, you can't even drill a well on it. It's going to be hell to pay trying to sell it for what you bought it for. You need to check on services. Okay, in a rural area, folks who right now are living in an urban environment, a suburban environment, or should we say an ex-urban environment, they're used to gas, they're used to electric, they're used to phone, they're used to everything. I'm sitting in the middle of nowhere here. we're having this conversation after your kind assistant. A tech whiz, I am not. But this is all satellite. The nearest gas line to this place is 30 miles away. Power does go out here, but it ends 3 miles up the road, and then there's no power for 90 miles. So this is a whole different mindset that you have to get your hands around. And you have to be, if you're buying a piece of rural ground, you have to look at it as, and I hate to use the word because it's Agenda 21, and that's not a good thing, but sustainable. Okay, are you going to reasonably be able to get either a place put together that is totally off-grid, that is wind, solar, power generation, and storage, or are you going to be able to bring in the basic utilities you need to make that place function for you? And are you going to be able to put in place the backups in case something goes horribly wrong somewhere beyond our control, where you can live and function out there if all services are cut off? So one of the things that I tell people who are buying rural ground, you want to have propane.
So
okay.
if you
can get 2 1,000-gallon tanks. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so if you, when you help people buy land and you're advising them, what are the typical, I'm just curious, the typical size amounts of acreage that you typically sell to where these things are so, so much of a factor? Because it, like here on the East Coast, for example, like Maryland, Virginia, Southern Virginia, North Carolina, the states that are bordering, Pennsylvania, probably, not to say that those all wouldn't come into factor, or some of those things wouldn't come into play. I'm not saying that, they probably would, but probably less so if you're talking about, hey, I want to buy a farmette. I want to buy 10 acres in Pennsylvania, out further out from, any of the metropolitan areas, but yet, don't have quite so much of what you're maybe talking about. So I'm just curious, are those parcels you're referencing really large amounts of acreage, or what are you talking? Just curious, like if we're talking.
No, I mean, the rules that I'm kind of brushing over, they would apply to whether you're buying an acre in the middle of nowhere or 10,000 acres in the middle of nowhere. No difference. Okay. You want to make sure that you have good southern exposure so you can put in a satellite receiver. We're doing all this on satellite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's no cable here. There's no, ultra wired tech, whatever the hell they call it. This is just a satellite dish on top of the ranch house, and beam me up, Scotty. Okay?
Yeah, and that's, I gotta interject and just say that's why if the audio or video is a little less than par, it's because you are out in the middle of nowhere, and it was through great effort that you're even joining me for this podcast interview. So you're
great. Much more your great effort than mine, I might add. You did a great job. You did a great job coaching the Cowboy through the technical maze. Anyway, let's say you're buying. Let me give you an example of how you have to think ahead in terms of utilities, sustainability, and this place being what you need it to be in good times and in bad times. And we're going to talk about that, okay? Because there's a number of reasons to buy properties outside of exurban, and suburban areas right now. Let's say you buy 2 acres in Pennsylvania. Let's say you buy 2 acres in upstate New York, in Southern Virginia, any area that's kind of hilly and heavily wooded. Well, guess what? You probably love the trees on the property.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to really kill you if you have to cut half of them down to get satellite reception from your dish. So something to think about.
Yeah.
Will a propane truck be able to get to you to fill your tanks? Very important. And will it be able to get to you year round? Okay. Something to think about access. I mean, let's face it, you can have a Jeep, you can chain it up, you can get in or out just about any time. You can buy a snowplow. I mean, there's a million ways you can get yourself in and out, but there's other providers that need to be able to get in and out. I strongly recommend people go propane if they're going to be in a rural area. Don't hook up to city gas. Don't hook up to county gas. Forget the gas lines. You want to be self-sufficient. Propane, what a lot of people don't know, you can do long-term contracts. Right now, we're paying $1.32 a gallon, which is about 1/3 what you're paying for any type of fossil fuel heating or power in the big cities. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to make that less expensive also. But if you put in two 1,000-gallon tanks, and let's say you have a 2,000 square foot hideaway when you're all said and done, I mean, those tanks, they'll keep you going literally for a year, year and a half, depending upon the climate. And you can fill them up anytime you want. Okay, I mean, the less you're relying on public services, the more self-reliant you are. And self-reliant is, number one, the key to enjoying your place. And self-reliance can, under the worst conditions, be the key to you and your family surviving or not surviving. So there are a lot of considerations that go into this. Power, you need to have power, but you need to have a backup system. And in fact, even if somebody has their house on a quarter of an acre in town, you should have a generator. And it should be wired, so literally you start her up, you plug her into the wall, and half your house is powered, your freezers are powered, all the key ingredients of living, even if some rooms are dark and some rooms don't have heat, are in place. I mean, people have to think big picture. Once again, it's much more than, oh, I love the front door, right?
Yeah, right. Oh
How
yeah,
many times have you heard
definitely.
that? Oh, I love the front door. Oh, this patio is wonderful. Oh, look at that view out the living room. Listen, that's all important stuff. That's great. But folks, that's the icing, okay? Icing without a cake is not much. It's kind of a hollow shell. So you have to think about the cake. Now, if you're talking about rural property, one of the things that you have to do once you've decided where the location is going to be in, the community, the county, the state, the region, for all, and listen, there's many more. Obviously, we don't have time. We could spend all day on this. But once you have decided where you're going to live, or where you're going to be, or where your retreat's going to be, or your investment, however you're looking at it. And by the way, you should be looking at it in all those respects. You should be looking at it as a place to enjoy, as a place to go to be safe if you have to, and as an investment and as a legacy property for your kids, your grandkids, whoever it happens to be. You know, land for love and money, okay? You have to look at the whole big picture. When you've decided where it's going to be, then you get into the nitty-gritty of checking out whatever you're buying. And it might be a piece of land with an old homestead you're going to fix up. It might be a piece of land with, I don't recommend it, but with McMansion that you happen to love and that you can afford. You're never going to sell it as long as you understand that. But people need to understand that land, unlike a city lot, which is completely controlled by the government in terms of its development, in terms of its existence, and in terms of its future uses, rural lands are not. Which is why, by the way, community, county, town, all that becomes very important, okay? There's much more flux in rural land, what can go wrong, what can go right, than there is in a urban or suburban environment. So the first thing you have to check out is water. No piece of land is going to work without water. You have to, at the very least, be able to drill a well, or at the very least have a developable spring on the property that you can file on and adjudicate. It doesn't do you any good to go all this work, do this great spring development, have it pipe gravity flow into your house or your cabin, and then all of a sudden the upstream neighbor files the adjudication papers on it, and he owns the spring and you don't. I mean, people don't understand water rights. If it has live water, if it has a pond, if it has a stream, terrific. But there's other things you have to check. If it has live water, are there wetlands involved? Could you run afoul of the Army Corps of Engineers or the EPA or, any of the greenies that run amok anymore? And well, it's true. I mean, in terms of what you want to do with that property. In other words, you may think, oh, this is great. I'm going to dig out that cattail over there, and that's going to drain this little area, and that's where I'm going to put my gazebo. Well, you better check it out first. Okay. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure you can do what you want to do. I gave you the example of satellite. Okay. Do you have a southern exposure? Almost all the satellite link ups, like the one I'm using now, are in the southern sky. Some are low. Depends whether you use HughesNet, Exceed, Wild Blue. I mean, there's 4 or 5 pretty good outfits out there. I happen to prefer HughesNet. They don't pay me anything to say that, but they seem to be the most reliable, and I've tried them all. You need to find out what is the local fire protection. Okay, one of the things that happens in rural areas is there can be fires. They can be, there was the example of that illegal alien setting that fire in Colorado just last week. 10,000 acres, 200 homes burned. I mean, you have a moron criminal. But then there's, the careless Joe who flips a cigarette out the window of his pickup truck. Then you have lightning strikes. Then you have spontaneous combustion because somebody left, and I've seen it, left a hay bale that was wet in the center, and it rots and heats up. And I mean, literally, as you look at it, it's like somebody put a bomb in. And that fire can spread rapidly. So how can you protect your structure and your property from fire? And how good is the rural fire department there? I mean, in this area, everybody's on the rural fire department. I mean, if there's fire, it's all hands on deck because that fire can go anywhere. And this is where that sense of community comes in. When you're looking at a piece of land, you need to find out about the mineral rights that are underneath the land. And we don't have enough time for me to teach your audience about all the different types of mineral rights. The bottom line is check your mineral rights. You will be very unhappy if you buy your dream 10 acres, you put up your nice little cabin, everything's working great, and you wake up one morning and there's a drill rig in your front yard and they're looking for natural gas because they own the mineral rights underneath your land. And that happens.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, just even going down the checklist that you've been going down between water, the sustainability in general, the water, the electricity, the backup electricity, the fuel, all of those things, as well as I'm sure you can get into conservation and all those other things. What about then what I'm thinking about while you're talking, because I'm thinking, oh my God, like I'm so used to living in a metropolitan area where even though I'm a rural area outside of a metropolitan area like Washington, D.C., it's still, we don't tend to have those major concerns, but I could certainly see you should investigate all those things. What about, even like you said, even if it's 1 acre, even if it's no matter where it is, to be thinking about some of these things or all of these things. What about if you're buying a property that is already has a house on it, but it just needs to really be redone, re-updated, all those kinds of things. But somebody has come along and maybe thought about some of those things already, and put a lot of those things, making sure that the water's there, the electric's there, all those things. I don't know. What are you,
Well,
that's been your experience?
that's great. I mean, if you find a piece of land or a piece of partially improved or improved land, and it has the well in, all you need is a copy of the well permit and the driller's log. You should be fine once you review that. The mineral rights, that'll be in an abstract of the property, and the former owner, if they had an attorney, has probably already done that. In terms of utilities, obviously, if you flip the lights on the house, you get electricity. It's not hard to figure out. So that makes things a little bit simpler, okay? And that is really what I would call an ex-urban type of environment where you are. Why don't we say you don't see a lot of lights and roofs, but nonetheless, you're still kind of within the context of civilization. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that type of scenario can be great for folks. Then you need to check with, once again, location, right? Community, locality, county, state. And you need to check on what the building regulations are. I mean, are you ever going to be able to add on to that house? Are you going to be able to remodel it, not bring it totally up to code, which can break anybody's wallet? I mean, what types of things you kind of got 1 foot up the stairway? Can you bring the next foot up to the next stair tread is what you have to check on. But yes, some of your homework has been done then. It's just kind of a question of looking at what the former owner or owners did and just making sure everything's to hoil. For instance, in an example like that, okay, the example that you're using, let's say somebody finds 10 acres, old farmhouse, partially redone, has water, has power, there's some propane tanks out in the back. I mean, whatever it happens to be. Well, one of the things that you have to think about is when you ask the seller for their stuff, okay? And one of the clauses I always put in a purchase agreement is I want to see the title report, but I want a copy of all the Schedule B exceptions. I don't want to just see the title report. If there's a Schedule B exception, and for those of you who are not familiar with title reports, basically it's an insurance policy that you're buying or the seller is buying for you that protects the title to your property. And it's divided into two parts. Schedule A, which is like this grandiose things, nuclear war, fire, famine, pestilence, marauding hordes, yes, zombie invasion, whatever. That's to protect the insurance company. But Schedule B, that's the meat of the deal. And Schedule B are the specific exceptions that relate to that property. And you want to see, is there an easement across the property? I mean, if you bought your 10 acres and the neighbor has an easement through the middle of your property to get to his, that cuts your property values down and obviously affects your privacy. If you get a copy of all the Schedule B exceptions, you can kind of do your homework in terms of checking what the previous owner checked, because that condition of title, unless the owner put it on themselves, has been pertinent to that property since day one. Okay. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you want to be really careful of, and I say this all the time when I speak to groups, never trust thy neighbor's taste. Okay. That is a rule of real estate. Never trust thy neighbor's taste. Think about this. So you find your 10 or 20 acres and it's beautiful and the sunset and the views and the trees and everything is checked out. You bought it and you're happier than a pig in slop. And all of a sudden the 10 acres next to you, they decide that pink trailers are their thing. And they bring in I'm serious, I've seen it, 3 pink trailers. Okay. I actually saw, this is a true story. By the way, Land for Love and Money is written anecdotally, so there's a million stories. I use the stories to teach people in the book, okay? And these are true stories. So there was actually a deal. It was 20 acres, beautiful, and kind of in a 20-acre ranchette subdivision, if you will, with architectural controls. And they weren't overly strict. I mean, it was kind of a Western type setting. But they did say you had to have earth colors on your home, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, literally, these people moved in next to my clients, who also are ranch owners, next to my clients, a pink modular home. And when I say pink, I mean hot pink. which you could see through even summer foliage, never mind when the leaves were off the trees. And it absolutely ruined it was right in the view plane. And I want you to know that in the end they had to paint it, but they almost beat it in court by saying hot pink is an earth color because it's one of the colors of the sunset.
Wow.
I want people to think about that. Never trust thy neighbor's taste. So when you get a piece of property, think defensively. Where can I put my property? Or if the property already has an improvement, what can a neighbor do to screw me up? And try and think defensively, try and plan for it. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's so true. Whether you're talking about large parcels of land or you're talking about a neighborhood development, especially if there's no HOA, if it's a property that's built prior to about the mid 90s, at least in this area, you're not going to likely have an HOA, and people can literally build Fort Knox around their house with a 6-foot privacy fence. And I've seen that actually before, where you're my God.
Yeah, with the slats of the fence out, not in, right?
Yeah.
Right, the back of the fence is out, not in. Right? Yeah, we've all seen that.
Yeah, horrible.
And let me tell you, folks, that can even happen on the really big properties. I'm going to give you a perfect example. So this is a ranch we own in Montana. It's about, at one point it was 16,000 acres, about half that now. But the neighbor, who is a nationally known name, I won't name him, but nationally known. If I said it, you go, oh, him. Okay. The neighbor, he has 20,000 acres. Now you would think if we got 16 and they got 20,000 acres that we ought to stay out of each other's way, right?
Yeah, you'd think
No,
so.
he decided he was going to run. He decided he was going to run buffalo. Okay, not cattle, but buffalo. Now, a 4-strand wire fence does just fine for holding cows in, but it really doesn't hold a 2,000-pound bison who's used to wandering. I mean, literally, they just walk through it. It's like, what fence? So for 3 years, the entire valley, wasn't just us, we're chasing buffalo. And I'm not sure I think there's wild buffalo roaming there still, right? Where the deer and the buffalo roam. So even on huge properties, never trust thy neighbor's taste.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Reid, you are such a wealth of knowledge. And I want to ask you about two other, one other topic and then just a quick question too. Because I know people can buy your book, in fact, for land or money, for love of land or money. Is that right? Do I have that right, Reid?
Yes, Land for Love of Money, and it's www.landforloveofmoney.com, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever.
And it's Reid, Reid, Lance, Lance, Rosenthal,
That's correct.
Rosenthal. Yeah. But I got to ask you a couple of. I'm sorry.
And if they like the historical fiction stuff, which has also been #1 national bestseller, a bunch of awards, etc., miniseries starting in a couple years, set in May of 1854. It's kind of the story of America set in the West, and the land plays a huge role. Land is kind of a character in the books, actually. But
yeah.
That's threadswestseries.com.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about two things because I want people to know that you are a pretty prolific writer at this point. A really romance and Western series that you do, the Threads West, an American Saga series set, like you said, in the 1800s American West. So I really wanted to ask you kind of how you really got into that, just briefly, because I know we could probably sit here for 2 hours just talking about that. But how did you get into writing that? How did you get from? So you had this career in real estate all these years, and then you always wanted to write, and just kind of really got into writing fiction, right?
When I was 9 years old, I decided I would write books. It just took me quite a long time to kick myself in the butt and do it. And there's a story on my personal website, reidlancerosenthal.com, and it's called Why I Write. And I can tell you the exact moment when I was 9 years old, I decided I would write books. I love American history. I am absolutely incensed at its erasure, omission, twisting, distortion, and I am a huge believer in the fact that touchstone of the past is the guidepost of the future, which is exactly why they'd like to erase the past, because then they can shape the future. But the bottom line is, I've always also been absolutely enamored of the fact that America alone, of all the nations on the planet, only America is a tapestry. Every other country is a mosaic. It's a really, really, really big difference. And I have always been fascinated with how the threads of lives, i.e. Threads West, how the threads of lives of men and women of uncommon cultures, different origins, competing ambitions, how they've woven together into the cloth, which is us. And that's really what that story is about.
It's just super fascinating. I mean, and you do a lot of things, which is really cool because you have all this wealth of experience and knowledge in real estate, but yet you now have written so many books in your series and even the books regarding real estate. But you also have a radio program. So, and yours is, tell me the title again. I have my notes somewhere.
It's on it's on the rightsideradio.com.
On the rightsideradio.com. So it's a political.
Rightsideradio.com. Yes. Yes. Political commentary. It's the news behind the news. I mean, I really go over stuff that nobody else is covering, which is critically important to all of us. I mean, I don't care if you're left, you're right, you're up, you're down, you're black, you're white, you're red, you're from Mars. It's critically important to all of us. And I try and focus on that. There's definitely not a left-leaning tint to my dialogue.
Definitely
Okay?
not.
There's a right-leaning tint. But I can tell you that there's a lot of liberals that listen to me and, in fact, agree with some of the things. I get some amazing emails. I also get some, scorchers. We have about 2.5 million listeners,
Wow.
and 80% of them are on podcast, and including 17 foreign countries, which is amazing. So if you go to ontherightsideradio.com, you can download the app, put it on your phone, listen anytime you want. There's a 5-year archive, which, by the way, the producers have done a fabulous job on the search engine. If you want to hear any of my shows on Obamacare, on land regulation, on United Nations Agenda 20. I mean, type in about any subject you want, and those shows will come up going back 5 years. You can listen and throw Rotten Tomatoes or laugh, however it happens to hit.
Well, it's super cool, and it's super cool that you have a lot of interest. I love that. I love talking to people like you, Reid, and so many of my guests that I've had. So many people I know that have so many layers to who they are, to their lives, and what they're willing to do. I love that you have 2.5 million listeners and 14 countries. And in fact, I'm always amazed, when I track my podcast stats, where it goes and where listeners are coming from. And Iran is actually the number one country outside of the United States of my listeners. So it's kind of really interesting. And then other countries like, Russia and Mexico, Canada, Sri Lanka. I mean, it's kind of really crazy when you think about how far your message can go if you're willing to sit down and craft a message and put yourself out there. So I love that you do the radio program as well as writing fiction, romance, Western novels, and have so much depth on real estate. So, but before I let you go, and I want you to tell people how all the ways they can reach you, because you do have so many different venues. But I wanted to ask you, I have to ask you about your mother. I'm fascinated about your mother, because now tell me about your mom. How old is your mother?
94.
94 years old. Your mother is 94 years old, right?
94, and she's kind of like Barbara Stanwyck in the Big Valley. Okay, I mean, for those that remember that, okay. I mean, when the ranch hand, her place is down in New Mexico. When the ranch hands come in the ranch house down there, it's yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. I mean, it's like unbelievable. and additionally, she's been a realtor since she was 48. She went into real estate when she was 48. She was, up to about 8 years ago, one of the top 50 residential brokers in the United States. And
Wow.
She still sells $30 million worth of property a year, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that right there is such an amazing feat. And is she in Wyoming, where you're at, in your area?
No, she's in New Mexico. She's in New Mexico. And listen, Patti, as a fun little thing, it's always been on her bucket list. So she just wrote her first book, and it's actually coming out through a publisher November 1. It's called The Turquoise Lady.
The Turquoise Lady. Wow. It's 94. Lady. So I guess
it's up for pre-sales on Amazon right now. It's a clip.
So pre-sales for The Turquoise Lady. I mean, I tell you what, I just love that, because I love that people, when they are at that age, when they're, I mean, my goodness, 94 years old and still just kicking it and doing their thing and pushing the envelope and writing a book and selling $30 million a year in real estate. I mean, that's just not something you see every day. And God bless her. I think that is so great. And maybe sometime I'd love to have her on my podcast
Yeah.
and talk about her real estate career. I
Well,
would love it.
she'd love to do it, and I mean, she's pistol. You would love it. She'll have you in stitches.
I have a feeling she would. So, how can people find you and all the different venues that you're into?
Okay, for the historical fiction series, threadswestseries.com, www.threadswestseries.com. For the real estate books, which are written anecdotally, you'll howl over some of the stories, but they're true. www.landforloveandmoney.com. If you just want to kind of peruse the cowboy, so to speak, and to read some of the blogs and stuff, www.reidlancerosenthal.com. If you want, this is a long list. If you want to see the ranches, just some of the ranches that we're involved in, www.ranchesofthewestinc.com. And then finally, if you want to listen to the radio show, if you're stout of heart, then on the right side radio.com.
Well, that's fantastic. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me today and joining my listeners and really shedding some very real perspective on, if you should go live your dream. And if you want to have a horse property, you want to have chickens and all this land to roam around, and whether it's 10 acres or a million acres, whatever. I don't know. I don't even know if there's such a thing, but thousands and thousands of acres. I just think it's, you have so much to offer, so much informative things as far as, is your checklist in your book by any chance?
That checklist will be in the workbook, which is coming out next summer. We'll volume 2. Yeah.
Okay. So you have
will be in there along with some contract forms and some tricks to get the best deal, both for finance, if you're not going to pay cash, or for in terms of how you're buying your property. And today we kind of broadly brushed the acquisition side of these things, but there's another segment, which is the ownership of them and the management of them and the legacy of them and the conservation of them. And then there's a third, which is the disposition of them, how to do that smart and correct. But I can if I have just a minute, I'm just going to tell people this is a great time. While everybody thinks things are really great, and in many ways they're a lot better than they've been for a long time, but there is some fabrics which underlie the world's economy and the United States economy, which the debt cannot be denied. The fractious behavior in society cannot be denied. The geopolitical dangers, one whack ball in North Korea or Iran or wherever, cannot be denied. And anytime you can put together an asset, which number one, you can enjoy and your family can enjoy and you can pass down. And number two, can be a safety retreat in the event the worst happens. And number three is a place to put your money where it's real, it's always there, it's not in a bank, it's not, it's not in somebody else's control, it's in your control. This would be a really good time to.
That's a really good point. I like that. If you ever needed to grow your own food and needed to, really sustain yourself, if a lot of horrible things, came to pass, I mean, hopefully that will never happen. But I mean, it would be sure nice to know you have somewhere to go, that, you could really still have a life when there's a lot of chaos everywhere else. So you've given.
Well, it's very difficult to grow vegetables on a bond, a stock, or a checkbook.
What a good quote. I like that. Well, thank you so much, Reid. You've really given so much to think about and so much practical information as far as land acquisition. And then, you have such great resources that I hope people will check out if they're even thinking about buying land or buying some property like that. So, and even if they're not, if they just want to check out your radio program or read some of your great Western romance type fiction, that would be wonderful. So thanks again. And this wraps up this episode of the Pitbull Patti Show, where we are keeping it real in real estate. So until next time,
Well, been my pleasure, Patty. Thank you.
thanks, Reid.